meters per second in perspective, if there are any runners or joggers listening, that's a pretty reasonable pace jog. So right now the spacecraft is moving towards the ISS about as fast as if you were going on a morning jog.
All right, so at this point, we're inside the approach ellipsoid that we were talking about. So as Dragon moves inside of just about 1 kilometer away, again, the approach ellipsoid is an elliptical shape, 4 kilometers long by 2 kilometers tall by 2 kilometers wide, essentially a 3-dimensional oval. And that's just one of those checkpoints around the station that governs the approach of visiting vehicles. Before we were in this point, Dragon was on a 24-hour free safe trajectory. So if we had lost control of Dragon, it would have been at least 24 hours before we moved inside. But we're now inside this approach ellipsoid. Dragon given the go as it was given the authority to do the approach initiation burn. And so that next imaginary gateway around the space station is the keep out sphere. That one's a little bit smaller, has a radius of only 200 meters, and we won't be crossing that until we're done with the manual flight test, but we'll do the go, no go to cross that sphere well in advance of them actually moving in.
Yeah, in about 14 minutes from now, there'll be a small correction maneuver to take us from waypoint 0 to waypoint 1 right outside the keep out sphere. So if we have a video of Dragon at that point, you may see the Draco thrusters firing. Right now, vehicle looking healthy as it's making its way towards that R-bar approach, just 400 meters below the International Space Station.
Pretty dramatic shot of Dragon as it continues to close in. The station and Dragon right now just over the northeastern part of China. They are in an orbital nighttime, so the sun is setting on both vehicles right now as they're flying about 262 statute miles over the surface of planet Earth. 2 crew members, NASA's Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, inside Dragon, closing in on their home for the next several months, completing the first crewed flight of the commercial crew program era to the International Space Station. So we should be under 2 hours away from the planned docking time. We were looking at a docking around 7:30 a.m. Over here on the West Coast, but they were able to move through a number of their maneuvers a little bit quicker. We've got about 16 minutes ahead of the approach initiation burn, so that docking time will be a little bit variable and will hinge on how quickly they're able to move through that second manual flight test. But everything continuing to go smoothly. We're waiting for their arrival at waypoint 0, should be coming up in just about 12 minutes from now.
Dragon SpaceX on Big Loop. The ground is go for approach 0. We will be enabling the maneuver shortly. The expected maneuver start time is 1256 UTC. Reminder that Dragon will nominally continue approach through waypoint 1 toward waypoint 2 without stopping at waypoint 1.
Next Dragon on the Big Loop, we copy go, and 12:56.
Good copy.
All right, so we heard both teams, the NASA and SpaceX teams, are go to continue on past waypoint 0. So they'll be coming up on that point in about 10 minutes from now, and they're just going to continue on along up until waypoint 1. And so it'll be a quick pass through. They'll go from just 400 meters directly below the International Space Station up to waypoint 1. So they're going to do pretty much a 90-degree maneuver to go from directly below station to directly in front of it. And this is always something really cool to see. So you're seeing city lights on the ground below Dragon right now as we continue to fly. We just made a pass over Japan. So those were city lights in Japan as Dragon and the station just made a pass over, and now they're about to cross over the northern Pacific Ocean. So things will be dark for a little while as Dragon continues to close in. We should have sunrise coming up at about 21 minutes after the hour. So if everything holds on track, we should have some good sunlight for docking, hopefully, but we'll have lights on board the Dragon itself. You can see the red and the green telling us where it is as it continues to approach. At this moment, we are just about 585 meters away. All right, in just about 8 minutes, we're going to pass through waypoint 0 and continue on to waypoint 1. And then shortly after that, the crew is going to get their second chance to jump in and start sending some commands to Dragon.
That's right. On the displays, they have some commands in the upper right-hand corner. We got a little sneak peek at that while they did one of their video sessions showing us the displays earlier in this mission. And they'll command a hold once they get to about 220 meters away from the station. That's where they'll conduct that manual piloting test.
And again, this will be their second manual piloting of the Dragon spacecraft. We were able to watch them yesterday.
Copy that. We're ready.
Yesterday, shortly after getting on orbit, they were able to take control of Dragon and go through a number of pointing maneuvers or attitude adjustments. And in this case, they're going to be doing pretty much the second half of everything. When you're flying a spacecraft, you're worrying about attitude adjustments, and then you're worrying about translational adjustments. And this is going to be their chance to do those translational maneuvers.
Yeah, and once they finish that manual piloting test, then Dragon will take over. They'll transition and go towards waypoint 2. that'll put them just 20 meters away from space station.
All right, well, as we're just about 5.5 minutes to their arrival and quick pass through waypoint 0, let's jump over to Gary Jordan over at Mission Control Houston to check how everything's lining up with the teams in Houston for this approach and docking. Gary?
Thanks, Dan. Really good to see Dragon, Bob, and Doug inside of 500 meters, so close to the International Space Station, just flying through all of the milestones we have to get towards docking towards the International Space Station. A lot of prep work went into this moment. Previously, we transitioned control of the station's attitude to Russian thrusters, also configured the station itself for the docking attitude. Chris Cassidy was just finishing up his midday meal. His next activity, just a little bit more than 20 minutes from now, will begin to set up for Dragon monitoring. He has a tool called the RPOP. We'll be able to display some of the telemetry data coming from Dragon through the C2V2. This is the common communication for visiting vehicles. It's established a link between the International Space Station and Dragon. Dragon's telemetry data, all the information being relayed through the International Space Station. And Cassidy will be able to monitor from this tool, again, setting up in just about 20 minutes. Everything going according to plan from the International Space Station side of things, getting great views from Dragon of the International Space Station. Look at that, the lights reflecting from the outside of the International Space Station turned on. So Bob and Doug have a very clear view of the International Space Station. Should be entering into an orbital sunrise here shortly. From there, we'll take you through the next few maneuvers, again, passing waypoint 1 and going right into that manual flight test. Again, everything here from Mission Control Houston, International Space Station configured for docking. Everything's go from our end. Back over to you in Hawthorne.
All right, thanks, Gary. We're jumping in now with Bob and Doug inside the Crew Dragon. Again, you're able to see what they're looking at on those displays there. And this a view from the Dragon spacecraft itself. You can see the International Space Station continuing to close in. Right now, they're only about 430 meters away. They're going to be quickly passing through waypoint 0 in the next 3 minutes, and they're going to continue their way up to waypoint number 1, which is going to be just about 220 meters out in front of the station itself.
Yeah, and Dragon has a number of relative navigation sensors, items that are used for guidance and control of the vehicle. So right now, Dragon's in a pointing mode that has those relative navigation sensors trained on the space station, with the attitude control system making minor adjustments as it needs to, if there's any roll correction or anything that it needs to perform. And Bob and Doug getting closer and closer to that manual flight test. They looked pretty comfy in those seats for that view right behind them.
Yeah, they are suited up, and again, they get suited up for anything we consider kind of the dynamic operations inside the spacecraft. So anytime that they're either in an approach and docking maneuver or an undocking maneuver, and then obviously at the very start and the very end of their missions, which are probably the most dynamic phases, that launch and ascent, and then that deorbit and splashdown when they come home and splash down in the Atlantic. We are just 420 meters away from the space station, less than a third of a mile. Should be just about a minute and a half until we're passing through waypoint 0, and then Dragon's going to begin a little over 20 minute, about the 25-minute trip up to the docking axis. So this will be waypoint 1. There'll be 220 meters directly in front of the station, and it'll be lined up perfectly with that international docking adapter at the very forward port of the Node 2 module, also known as Harmony, on the space station.
Yeah, and there'll be a small attitude correction there. The navigation and prop specialists on our team will monitor that burn. And then hopefully we'll hear some words from the core to the crew, letting them know that we've had a good course correction towards waypoint 1.
Again, things a little bit dark right now. We should have sunrise in about 25 minutes. And so things will light up as we get closer to that manual flight test, and hopefully by the time we're there, we'll be right in front of the space station itself. We should get some good light on Dragon, and hopefully some views from the station looking straight out at the spacecraft using the cameras that are right next to that docking port on Node 2. And then Bob and Doug will once again take the controls using those touchscreens to maneuver Dragon. They'll do a number of different translational maneuvers. So physically moving the Dragon spacecraft in space. Oh, we're seeing some thruster firings there. And so those are using some of those, we call them the service section Draco thrusters. There's 12 around the lower part of the Dragon spacecraft.
Very cool to see those Dracos firing. They actually use a hypergolic propellant, so it's monomethylhydrazine and nitrox, which very, very handy because you mix those two propellants together and they make fire, which is exactly what you want when you want a reliable engine when you're doing these proximity maneuvers. So nice to see those.
Dragon SpaceX on Big Loop, approach 0 has started and the trajectory has converged on waypoint 1. Expect arrival at waypoint 1 at 1322 UTC.
So basically, you might have heard the feed that they are talking about waypoint 1, waypoint 2.
Big Loop
In terms of space
13:2.
station, they have two possible ways they can dock. There are, we can, call it as like a gate,
So
of
those
reading,
ones
in
from
which you
Anna
can,
there, confirming
get into.
good
So
convergence. So what that
waypoint
means
1
is
and
the
waypoint 2.
trajectory of
So
the
now
spacecraft is
you
now
have seen in the
syncing
video
up
that
with where
there were
waypoint
small,
0,
cluster
or excuse me,
firing. So those were the
waypoint
super
1 would be
Draco thrusters.
when
They were
both
firing
spacecraft are
that
moving
to
forward in
the,
time.
fine
So
course
that means that
correction.
Dragon will be right where it
Now
needs to
the
be,
trajectory is aligned
and we're
towards,
expecting
docking
Dragon to
with,
reach waypoint 1 about 25 minutes from now.
waypoint 1.
Yeah,
And
and
now they are
that
on
still
the way
puts
to,
us still about 16 minutes ahead
waypoint
of
1 and
the
talking to
original
ISS.
timeline. So we're
Nitya
expected to
Anand in the
arrive
comment
at
section
waypoint
is
1
asking
at
for joining, go to Skylab
1322
India.
UTC
It is for,
or
if you,
622
you are right,
AM over
Nitya,
here
thank
on the
you.
West Coast in
So
Hawthorne.
people who want to
And
join
if we
Space Kids India,
continue to
please
track
log on
about
to
16 or so minutes early, we may get to that docking a little bit early as well. Again, we were tracking right around 7:30 AM over here on the West Coast. So we may be more in the neighborhood of about the 7:15, but obviously that just depends on how all of the additional maneuvers go. But Dragon so far moving ahead of schedule in its flight to the International Space Station. We've moved past waypoint 0, so we're inside 400 meters right now, just under 370 meters away from the station. Already converged on its next stop is going to be waypoint 1. And once it gets there, again, the crew is going to jump in and command a hold before they move into their manual piloting test. right, it is 6 a.m. here in Hawthorne. If you're just now tuning in, the Dragon spacecraft well in range of the International Space Station right now, just 350 meters away. We've stepped through all of our procedures, all of our burns, all of our maneuvers to get Dragon to this point since we launched just a little over 17 and a half hours ago. Dragon was able to make all of its maneuvers to get it on the same orbital plane as the International Space Station, and we've already begun integrated operations between the teams here in Hawthorne and those out in Mission Control Houston, and now we're just really getting into some of the final steps before Dragon makes it to the space station.
Yeah, and on your screen right now we're in orbital night, so the Earth is blocking the sun, but you can see the lights from the Dragon spacecraft. That flashes a light that's right along the forward hatch. Right now, Dragon is in a relative pointing mode that's pointed directly at the space station and making its way towards waypoint 1, which is about 220 meters below the station. The International Space Station, when we're doing proximity operations, has a couple of imaginary gates. They're sort of three-dimensional shapes around the space station for vehicles that are approaching. Right now, we're moving towards a hold just outside of the 200-meter keep-out sphere. And Bob and Doug aboard, currently seated in their spacesuits, monitoring the transition. And when they get to waypoint 1, they'll issue a hold to conduct a manual flight test on this test flight mission.
Yeah, this will be their second manual flight test, and really the second kind of key objective for them to really put Dragon through the ringers. This is a demonstration flight. This is that final test before we certify the SpaceX Dragon to operationally carry full crew complements to the International Space Station. They were able to complete their first flight test shortly after getting on orbit. That one, they focused on changing Dragon's attitude, using the Earth as a guide to put Dragon in a very specific orientation known as local vertical, local horizon, essentially putting it in an orientation the same as a plane flying over the surface of the Earth. So the attitude control of Dragon, just one part of, or really one half of controlling the spacecraft. Now they're going to be testing out the translational maneuvers. So once they command that hold, the first thing that they'll do is align Dragon very precisely with the actual docking axis, and then they'll step through and send a number of commands to the spacecraft through those touch screens, moving it across a couple of different axes. So again, translational means you're moving left, right, forward, backwards, up, down, and that's just that's one half of really controlling the spacecraft, is you have all of these different axes to worry about, both translational and for attitude. So they'll step through those. Depending on how those go, we'll then be able to move in for the final approach.
Yeah, that's right. One thing to consider with a spacecraft is it is a three-dimensional body that's moving in space, so you not only have to control your X, Y, Z position, that up, down, left, right, forward, back motion, but you also have to control which direction you're pointing. So we've alluded to the sim online that starts you off in a skewed attitude. Anytime you're pointed in a different direction, then do those translations. You have extra motions that you need to cancel out in space.
Yeah, I remember the simulation too can show you how deceiving it can be to fly in space, because when you initially look at it and you load up, it almost looks like you're already pointing directly at the docking port, and I just need to go straight, when in fact you need to physically move the capsule down and left and roll it so you're completely lined up, and then change which direction you're pointing. It's just infinitely more complex than just getting in your car and doing a left, doing a right, going forward, backward. You're operating in all dimensions when you're flying in microgravity in a spacecraft. So Dragon doing that autonomously right now. The crew will step in to do some manual control, just to again, prove
space
out the
station.
Dragon systems for the
Dragon
crew
capsule
to
is
jump in,
already synced to
should
the
they
International
have to.
Space Station,
Looks
but,
like we're getting
just
some
around 10
thunderstorms,
kilometers
actually,
away from the International
on the
Space
Earth
Station.
below.
Now
Let's see
they
where
will
they're
be
flying
reducing
over.
this gap
We're
little bit,
still
a
over the
little bit, a
Pacific
little bit,
Ocean. We
and
just
then
flew
finally
over the
they'll be able
island
to
of
dock with
Fiji.
the
In this orbital
International Space
nighttime, about
Station. So that
264
process is
statute
happening
miles
right
over
now, and we are
the restless
expecting
planet
around
Earth.
7:45 p.m. to 8 p.m. Indian
Beautiful to see
Standard
those
Time.
views of the
The
planet.
Dragon 2
Even more
capsule will be
beautiful when we
successfully
had
docking with the
orbital
International Space
orbital
Station. Even
daytime.
though we are, yesterday we were
But
so anxious
we had some really
because it
cool
was a
shots.
brand new vehicle carrying the astronauts.
There's
Even
one
though
point
now
when we
the
flew over
anxiousness,
the Caspian
I'm
Sea,
little bit less
saw some really
anxious
cool
than
clouds
yesterday,
there, and
but
I
I'm
think we
still,
also saw nighttime over
fingers
Japan
crossed, because during the
as we were
last
flying
launch
over
of
the
Boeing
Terminator.
Starliner,
Yeah, we're
everything
able to see
went
a couple
well,
of city
but
lights on
the
the Earth's
Starliner
surface
capsule
below.
failed to
We're a
dock
little
with
more than
ISS.
halfway through
So
this
they
orbital
abandoned
nighttime.
the
We should be
docking
getting
mission
sunrise
and
in
they
about
returned back
15
to
minutes
Earth
from
without
now.
docking with,
And at
docking
that
with
point,
ISS at
we
all.
will be
But I really
just
hope
about
this
arriving
time,
at waypoint 1, so
the
we should be
Dragon
getting
2
sunrise
demo launch,
right as
I really
Dragon
hope
is
SpaceX
arriving
will nail
just
it
about
and they'll
220
successfully
meters
dock with the
out in front
International
of the
Space
space
Station.
station.
So this live will be continuing throughout
Here's
the
a cool
launch,
view from the station,
not throughout the
station
launch,
camera.
throughout the
You can see
docking
Dragon
session.
approaching.
Not just we are going to watch this docking session, we have a lot of special guests guys today.
We've just got those red and green lights on either side of the capsule. It gives folks looking at the capsule a sense of orientation of the vehicle.
Improve our own Indian space missions, and how can you
And
guys
here's a
students
view
can get
from
into the space
from
industry, and how
Dragon.
you
Dragon's
guys,
got a number of relative
students can join
navigation
Space India, our
sensors,
team,
as well as
build
a couple
new
of
stuff.
cameras that
There are a
can
lot
look
of new
forward
stuffs,
that will hopefully get
exciting
some
stuffs
additional views for as we
coming
get
up,
closer to
and
docking.
Space Kids India is having some really
Here's a good
cool
view of the space
announcements to be
station.
made today. Please stay tuned. We'll be continuing. All the panel discussions will be starting from the 8 o'clock. Until that, we will be sharing a lot of space-related
Pretty cool. You can
cool
actually
facts and
you can see the solar
informations.
panels and actually the thermal
Few of
radiators
my
there.
friends will be joining with me
Here's a great
live
view
today,
from a
and,
camera
let's
behind
enjoy this
Bob
beautiful
and Doug. Bob in
spectacular
the
live
right-hand
from
seat and the pilot seat.
from both
Doug in the
International
commander
Space
seat
Station
or
and
the
the Dragon
CDR seat.
capsule. Stay tuned, guys.
They've got
This is
a
going to be
display in
exciting.
front of them that's the forward view. It's got some procedural information on the left-hand side that's telling them criteria that they're looking for. Anything off nominal, they could, of course, step in and issue a command if necessary. And then on the left-hand and right-hand screen, we're actually their piloting controls. So when the vehicle is in an appropriate state to receive those commands, they can just hop in and use those touch-sensitive gloves, issue commands to the vehicle's attitude control system.
We have a little over 13 and a half minutes still in this maneuver. It is really cool to get this look inside. And again, that screen in the middle, you can see the trajectory that Dragon is on. And if they were to just continue, it would eventually take them on a path away from the International Space Station. But at the very top of really their orbital path right now, they'll converge on a point just 220 meters directly in front of the space station. So once they do get to that point, they'll be able to command a hold and have the vehicle essentially hover just a few hundred meters in front of the space station itself. They're moving at a pretty slow pace right now, but again, slow and steady wins the race whenever we're doing these docking maneuvers in close proximity to the station. We have about 13 minutes to go. They're moving at less than half a tenth of a meter per second as they continue to close in.
There's another view from the space station looking back, and there's a brief moment there when we were looking at Doug's display where you could see that same view that we had of the International Space Station. So they have those views from the vehicle overlaid on their displays to give them some awareness of their relative motion to the space station, especially handy if they had to actually step in for manual piloting to dock. Fingers crossed they won't have to do that today, though, and that the flight control system will operate as intended.
Yeah, we'll get the manual piloting demo, and then it'll be handed over to Dragon to do a nice
So
smooth
now you can see
operated
the light is blinking.
automated
That is the center
docking.
point of
Again,
the
we've not been
Dragon
tracking
2 capsule.
any
So that is the point
any
that should get
issues
docked
with
with
the
International
Dragon
Space Station.
spacecraft
Now
on
we
the
have
whole
one
flight
red color
uphill.
light
Been
taking
moving
back to
through
the right
each of
side,
these burns a
and
little bit
one
ahead of
green color
schedule,
light
running
to
about
the
16
left
minutes
side, and in
or so
center
ahead
the
of the
white color light is
timeline
to the right.
as it was
And you can
originally
see it
mapped out.
slowly, coming nearby. So we are really close
Yeah,
to the
very,
docking
very
area.
healthy vehicle, this
I
test
think
flight, very
we'll be
little.
docking
I'm sure Bob and Doug
at around
have a few things as well that they're getting used to. There's only
7:45
so much a
p.m.
simulator
to
can train you on. I
8
think they had
p.m.
mentioned a
IST.
little bit of
They
that
are just
during the ascent portion. There are a few things that are a little
focusing the
different than what they
camera, and
expected.
they are putting
But just
the
because
capsule
when you're
to
actually
the
launching on a
center of
rocket,
focus.
that's a different feeling than sitting in a training capsule.
Yeah, can't quite simulate a 9-minute ride on top of a controlled explosion in an office. But as they did give credit to the teams here at SpaceX, the actual piloting of the spacecraft went off exactly like their simulators. And so they're able to do all of that training here in Hawthorne, both in a cockpit simulator and in a full mock-up of the Dragon spacecraft itself, even able to get fully suited, plugged into the seats, go through all of the different systems that they had to get familiar with before they moved into their flight today.
Yeah, you and Jesse actually had a really cool opportunity to step in and see the training capsule. The team that I work on actually gets to help train the astronauts that are coming through. So I've had some cool opportunities to interface with the Crew 1 crew. They've already started their training for the Dragon vehicle.
Yeah, you get the really cool job. I get to come tag along every once in a while. But yeah, it was really exciting to literally sit in the seat where Bob and Doug were as they prepared for this mission. It was really exciting.
Station, it's Houston on the big loop for Chris, crew monitoring.
Good.
Chris, you can begin to monitor the approach per step 1 of 1.104 crewed Dragon approach and retreat monitoring.
Copy, Edward.
So heard some cool stuff over the loops there. Looks like Chris Cassidy aboard the station is getting ready to monitor. We'd sort of talked about this earlier, but during the Demonstration 1 mission, the crew aboard the International Space Station had issued commands to Dragon. That's a capability that they have. So
Yeah, so with Chris Cassidy now monitoring, we're a little under 9 minutes away from that arrival at waypoint 1. Let's jump over to Gary real quick for a quick station update, and he can walk us through some of the systems that are going to be in play during this manual piloting test. Gary?
Thanks, Dan. Yes, we're monitoring the approach of Bob and Doug. Now just about 300 meters from station, heading towards that waypoint 1. One of the next milestones here coming up is going to be the manual flight test. Chris Cassidy already getting in position in front of the RPOP. This is the rendezvous software that he'll be using to watch some of the demonstration and the rest of the docking procedures for Bob and Doug as they move in to dock with the International Space Station. Right at about the time of the manual flight test, they will be communicating through the C2V2, Common Communication for Visiting Vehicle. You heard the call on the big loop. That was Joshua Kutrick here in Mission Control Houston, Capcom, talking with International Space Station Commander Chris Cassidy all over the big loop. That's an integrated communication loop with space to ground on station, Dragon to ground on Dragon, everybody hearing the same thing. Once we're in position of the manual flight test, C2V2 will transition to receive video as well. We should be getting some great video from Dragon all through the hardware that is on the International Space Station, integrated and linked with the Dragon.
Event is,
Now
really
just
coming very
inside
close.
300 meters
We
from
already
station.
had
I'll toss
views
it back
from
over to
the
Hawthorne as we go through
ISS,
these
from
next
the
steps,
docking point
heading
of
towards
view,
waypoint
but,
1.
the space capsule is slowly approaching nearby to the docking port, which is waypoint 1. We are docking with the waypoint 1 actually.
Right on. Thanks for that
So let's
update,
hope for the
Gary.
best. Thank you for your latency.
As Gary said, we're inside 300 meters away from the space station. Should be getting that arrival at waypoint 1 in just about 6.5 minutes. And then we'll see some dynamic action pick up with Bob and Doug stepping in to command a hold to the Dragon spacecraft and then step into their manual piloting test. Just to give you a long look at everything, we were originally tracking the docking just a few seconds before 7:30 a.m. Pacific time. We have been moving well ahead of the timeline, so we may only be about an hour away from docking at this point, as they're moving about 16 or 17 minutes ahead of schedule so far with all of Dragon's maneuvers. We'll consider that initial contact and capture of the vehicle to be that initial docking. After that, though, there are a series of steps that have to take place with the Dragon vehicle, actually done in concert with the station itself, which will do a quick handover of its attitude control systems, and then the soft capture ring on the Dragon spacecraft will begin to retract, and then a series of latches or a series of indicators will tell the Dragon spacecraft when it's ready to start driving hooks, which will secure it very firmly to the international docking adapter on the very forward Node 2 port on the International Space Station. And then once we have docking complete, there will be a series of steps both for the crew on Dragon and for the crew on the International Space Station.
Yeah, that's right. Once docking is complete, the cavity in between the PMA node and Dragon, which we refer to as the vestibule, that is still a vacuum. So we'll do some steps there to bring air in from the International Space Station to pressurize that volume. There'll be a leak check on that volume to make sure that we truly have a good seal. Don't want to lose that precious life support to the vacuum of space. And then, of course, when we pressurize that volume, that area has been exposed to space for a pretty long period of time, and we're expanding a gas into it. So the temperatures will fall in there a little bit. So there'll be a period of time for a thermal hold to wait for temperatures to stabilize and to confirm that the pressure is good. So once all those things are good, then we can hopefully open the hatch, the forward hatch.
Yeah, we do expect it'll take about an hour and a half or so typically before we start seeing hatches opened between the station and the Dragon spacecraft following a docking. And there are going to be two hatches. The first on the station side is the APAS hatch. That one will get open first, and then we'll wait for everything just to make sure that, again, we're at an equalized pressure between the cabin inside Dragon and the now open hatchway on the station side before Bob and Doug are able to open up the Dragon hatch. A number of other things are taking place while we're waiting for the hatch opening to occur. Dragon, once it's docked to the space station, will be able to connect via an umbilical to transfer power from the International Space Station, so no longer needing to use its own solar arrays to power batteries and all the systems on board, be able to draw power.
Dragon SpaceX for Approach 1 on Big Loop. Approach 1 and the soft capture ring extension will begin shortly. Command a hold 20 seconds after beginning Approach 1 for the manual piloting demo.
Copies on the Big Loop. 20 seconds after Approach 1, we will command the hold.
Good copy.
And so real quick, what they're referring to there, in about 2.5 minutes, we'll be at waypoint 1, so about 220 meters out in front of the space station. And then just like waypoint 0, the vehicle able to bypass waypoint 1 and continue on its approach to the space station. The crew is going to jump in 20 seconds after they hear that approach 1 has started, command a hold, and then they're going to move into that second manual piloting demonstration on board Dragon. So we should see that all start to happen in just about 2 minutes. And thankfully, as promised, the sun starting to come up on both of our spacecraft.
Yeah, they also mentioned the soft capture system. So they'll do an extension of a ring with 3 pedal-like structures on it that are covered in micro switches and sensors. And when we do finally get to waypoint 2 and final approach for docking, those will interface with the international docking adapter and give us a confirmation that we've made what's called soft capture. Now, at that point, the spacecraft may have some relative motion, so that system helps get rid of any of that relative motion before we go in for final closure of the hard capture hooks.
So today, my friend Hari will be joining me. Hari, am I audible?
A little under a minute to go now. Dragon just about right out in front of the International Space Station.
At that point,
Again,
Hi,
less than a
hi
minute.
everyone. Hi,
It'll begin its approach 1, and then
Can you hear me?
our crew members inside of Dragon will command the vehicle to stop. It will hover, and then they will be able to begin that manual piloting demonstration.
just about 240 meters away from the space station. We're pretty much lined up right in front of it along what we've been calling the V-bar, and you may hear that on comms.
We do have a short communications blockage with the space station. We have pretty continuous coverage. We've had pretty continuous coverage getting views from the station cameras, which come down through our higher data rate, our KU band antenna. Sometimes it can actually get blocked by some of the station structure, whether it's solar arrays or other pieces of the station, depending on where the actual Kidz satellite that it's pointing at is located. And it looks like we do have that blockage for the next 5 minutes or so. And then once that clears up and we have a clear line of sight for that antenna, we'll get that video back from the International Space Station. So we're expecting that to come about 28 minutes after the hour, so in about 5 minutes from now.
Ground control teams still certainly have good data to both Dragon and the International Space Station, so they're still able to monitor what's happening, have good telemetry, so different sensors, the velocity of the vehicle, how the prop is doing, if any thrusters are firing, what commands are being sent.
Just had a quick Kidz handover for Dragon, so transitioning between those tracking and data relay satellites and standing by for confirmation of that hold